Hi folks, welcome to Chapter 13, Persuasive Speaking. Now let's take a minute and really reflect on where we're at. It's that point of semester where everything is so busy and the summatives are piling up. So are you feeling a little overwhelmed, or are you in a good space? And once you can self-evaluate and reflect on how you're doing, that can help you to more positively move forward. Because today we're talking about persuasive speaking, which is something that is so prevalent in our lives. We're going to talk about different types of persuasive speaking, strategies, approaches, and organization of persuasive speaking, and ethical forms of persuasion. So first things first, what does it mean to be a persuasive speaker? What qualities does a persuasive speaker possess? I also want you to visualize for a moment on how is persuasion important in your daily life. From convincing a loved one to go to the grocery store with you, to applying for a job, or trying to influence people on your beliefs and value. There's so many different ways to persuade people, and it's so ubiquitous in what we do every day. So what exactly is persuasion according to your textbook? Well, the definition is the art of convincing others to give favorable attention to our point of view. Now, I love that they emphasize the idea of art. Persuasion in public speaking truly is an art form that we can hone and develop and utilize our words in powerful ways. Now, persuasive speeches often focus on influencing beliefs, values, attitudes, and action. These are reasoned arguments that have statistics, personal narratives, or pathos, and are focused on motivating audiences to think or behave differently. So looking at those functions of persuasive speaking, there are different categories of persuasion. One is to convince, which I think is the most common type, or what we think of and imagine when we hear persuasion. And so, for example, that's getting people to agree with your perspective. You know, we have so many issues that are debated in the world. I like to remember this one as like global warming, so environmental issues. We want to convince people that a problem is happening. Then speeches to actuate are all about action or inspiring change or motivating a particular behavior. This is in every advertisement that we see about buying something now or getting involved. Proposition of fact, that's an argument that seeks to establish if something is true or false. For example, all those conspiracy theories like, are aliens real? That would be an example of a proposition of fact. Value, on the other hand, this is what we debate with our friends and family when it comes to watching sports teams or thinking about our favorite person, our favorite flavor of ice cream. For example, here, voting for the MVP of the season in a sports team would be an example of proposition of value. And then finally, policy is going to be legal in nature. This is the big social issues. Again, I go back to global warming. So how do you go about picking a persuasive speech topic? Well, there's some very clear and specific things that you need to remember. One is, who is your audience? The audience is the most important group of people in the room. So think about their demographics, their age, their values, their beliefs. Consider how receptive they're going to be to your topic. If you're talking about a topic that you know everyone in the room is going to disagree with, then you have to proceed with caution. Not that you can't talk about it, but how you approach that speech or that conversation is different. You might have a neutral audience, or you might have a hostile audience, which happens a lot at board meetings and things like that when people are really passionate and children are involved. Ethos, pathos, and logos, these are our tools of persuasion that have been used since ancient Greece with Aristotle. So you've got ethos as your credibility. Ethos can be research or academic sources or backing up your information. Ethos is also if you're an expert in the field. Whereas pathos is your stories. They're emotional, funny, engaging, but that's the art of the story and the emotions behind the information. And then logos, you've been doing that all along with all of your speeches in that formal outline. It's a logical arrangement of ideas. So if you were to look at these three categories, telling an emotional story, sharing logical statistics, or listening to the CDC explain how masks prevent the spread of disease, which one would you identify? I'll say pause for a second and see if you can't pick out which one is which. Now that you've paused, or you just kept going through, which is okay, ethos is going to be looking at organizations that are credible. So for example, right above us here is listening to the CDC. The CDC has credibility there. Pathos is emotion, so we're going to move that over to the telling a story. And then ethos is, or logos is that logical arrangement or application of statistics. We're going to skip this video, but I like it. It's older, but someone literally took our former president and noted his ethos, his pathos, and his logos. And so ethos being the credibility of the government, pathos is he talks about the death of children, so it hits at the heartstrings, and logos is that logical arrangement. If we do this, then this will happen. If we do that, then this will happen. So how do we use evidence effectively to establish our credibility? Well, again, you want to make sure your message is relatable to your audience. You want to consider the content in that process as you develop that speech. I love these examples here about using evidence effectively. So often if we get an assignment, we might go straight to Google and just find or skim for the first thing that pops up for the fastest information. But when you're persuading someone, for example, if you're persuading people to stop smoking, just saying that cigarettes contain thousands of harmful chemicals, we all know that. We've been taught that since we were very, very little. But did you know, according to Dr. Roger Morissette of Farmington State College, a single cigarette contains 4,000 chemicals. The specificity, also the use of saying it smells like acetone or paint strimmer or nail polish, all of this is really powerful. So be novel with the information you present. And remember, when you are citing sources, you want to make sure you have the publication date, the author's credentials, and the organization's affiliations or the title of the work. Remember, don't be general. Numerous articles are published examining the benefits of laser eye surgery. Who are these articles? I don't know who the author is, therefore I don't trust that information. Make sure your sources, speaking of trust, are trustworthy and fair. How do you know when our sources are credible online? Well, again, reviewing your research, reviewing the SIFT or the CROP method to evaluate sources is key. Now, when it comes to citing your sources, again, you want the author's name, the publisher's name, and then the date the source was used. I've got all these sentence starters here, and this is linked in our assignments as well. You can take a look at different ways to cite your sources aloud. Now, when it comes to persuasion, sometimes people's emotions get the better of them. When we are working with someone and we have completely opposite viewpoints, we're never going to see eye to eye if we don't acknowledge the other side or show respect. When we are angry and we're frightening people saying, do this or you'll die, that doesn't have any impact on people. In fact, it shuts them down. But being more appropriate, making sure that you're calming down your ideas, approaching it with kindness is key. Do not over manipulate. Now, you've got two different major types of organizational patterns for public speaking in terms of persuasion. And one is that traditional outline, problem, cause, solution, but the other is Monroe's motivated sequence, which is actually really similar, but the focus is on calling people to action. And I really like Monroe's motivated sequence because it's so practical based. So with Monroe's motivated sequence, you still have an intro, and your action step is your conclusion, but in your conclusion, you're challenging your audience to take some sort of small action today to improve the topic that you're talking about. Need is talking about what the problem is. Satisfaction is the solutions. And then step 4 is that visualization. If we do this, this will happen. If we do that, that will happen. And having that visualization helps really connect people to your topic. All right, I've talked about a few of these. There's problem solution, problem cause solution, refutal pattern. That's where you're doing counter arguments. So getting back to the application of Monroe's motivated sequence, step 1 is to tell a good story and to introduce the issue. In step 2, the need step, that's where a lot of statistics and data goes, and this is about how the problem affects people specifically. You're going to establish the need. Like if I was doing something on global warming, I would show and talk about all the different ways that we are hurting our community. Then when it comes to solutions should be practical based. Now that's not to say that you don't have big solutions too, but there needs to be at least one where your audience can make an impact on your topic immediately. Draw your audience in. Like for example, you could plant a tree and get more involved with recycling or conserve water. So those are practical solutions people can do. And then your visualization, again, that is about telling the audience what will happen if we don't take action or if we do. And finally, leave your audience with something specific that they can solve themselves. Ethical speaking, on the other hand, goes hand in hand with persuasion, but ethics relates to honesty, integrity, and morality. We as public speakers have a choice in how we prepare and deliver our information. It's so important that you acknowledge the other side. Again, don't just say one side is bad and one side is great. Things aren't black and white. So you need to approach things with respect and knowing what the occasion is. Ethical speaking involves setting responsible speech goals, promoting diversity, using inclusive language like you and we, and avoiding any hate speech. Ethical speaking allows us to be respectful, raises social awareness, educate others, and empowers positive change. So if we want to have an impact with our words, if we want to be persuasive, we need to follow these ethical speaking guidelines. Okay, here is, what does ethical listening look like? If you had to draw it out, what would you draw? Ethical listening allows us to actively interpret and analyze content. We remove our biases and listen with intent. We display respect for speakers, and we listen with our whole bodies, not scrolling on our phones. So that's all I've got for you today. I am so excited to hear your persuasive speeches.